It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce to you General Joseph Lengyel. General Lengyel received his commission in 1981 through the Air Force ROTC program at the University of North Texas. Oops. He's a command pilot with more than 3,000 flying hours and has served in various operational and staff assignments, primarily as an F-16 instructor pilot and weapons officer. His experience in the F-16 includes tours in Air Combat Command, Pacific Air Forces, United States Air Forces Europe, and the Texas Air National Guard. He's commanded a fighter squadron, an operations group, an air expeditionary group, and the Air National Guard Readiness Center at Andrews Air Force Base. Additionally, General Lengyel served as the senior United States defense official, Office of Military Cooperation, and Defense Attaché, Cairo, in Egypt. Prior to his current assignment, General Lengyel served as the Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and now serves as the 28th Chief of the National Guard Bureau. As the Chief, he ensures that the nation's 453,000 Army and Air National Guard soldiers and airmen are accessible, capable, ready to defend the homeland, and to provide combat forces to the Army and to the Air Force. He is the first Air National Guard officer ever to serve both as a full general and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Please welcome to the ACSC stage a great leader, mentor, and citizen airman, General Joe Lengyel.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody. Have a seat. Good morning. So it's great for me to be here and talk to all you folks. And when I'm here, it means I'm not in Washington, and that makes me happy right away. So yeah, I've been in the Guard now for going on 25 years. First 10 was active duty, and I have lived my entire time in the Guard. I have watched the integration of our components in the Air Force. Didn't know much about the Army piece of this thing until probably about 4 years ago or so when I started looking at it. But right after the first Gulf War, I got out, got hired by Delta Airlines, and started flying for the Texas National Guard, Air National Guard. And that, when I got to Texas in the 149th Fighter Wing, I had said that, look, you know, I had been I was a pretty recent fighter weapons school graduate, weapons officer at Ramstein. And I come back and I show up at Kelly Air Force Base, and I said, hey, I'm going to make, you know, I had any goal that any fighter weapons school grad worth his salt would have. He says, I'm going to make this the best fighter squadron in the world. Well, weapons officer wouldn't have a similar goal. And so I got there, and you know, after about 6 months, I said, I realized I got, you know, 6 full-time fighter pilots in the squadron, the rest of the part-timers flowing in and out. Some of those pilots had a judge, had a farmer, had some other people that were, you know, just civilian professionals, had lots of airline pilots, as you might imagine. But I got there and I said, hey, I'm going to have to readjust my sight picture here. I'm going to have to go from best fighter squadron in the world to competent contributors. So, I mean, so I surveyed the field, and I realized I didn't have the tools that I needed. I mean, we were good, we were solid, we were dependable, we were good, but I didn't have a bunch of quarterbacks that were the same place that I had come from, where everybody had, you know, 1,000+ hours in the F-16. I had guys who had flown F-100s and F-102s, and I mean, it just wasn't the same mix. But you know, so I watched over the next, you know, my next 15 years as flying fighters at that organization, and multiple deployments in and out of the Middle East and around the world. And I saw the Air Force started to shrink and divest themselves of force structure. The Air Force started to rely more heavily on the reserve component, all of it, not just the National Guard. I talk about the Guard. I talk about Army Guard. I got 350,000 of those people, and a lot of combat structure for the Army. and we talk the Air Guard, we've got 100,000 of those people and a lot of combat structure for the Air Force. But the Air Force moved to relying more heavily on the Air National Guard than they had previously. And there became, I had units, we had units that hadn't had an ORI in 10 years. Just because we were deploying and all kinds of good excuses and reasons. But, the discipline that came into the Air National Guard over the next 10 or 15 years, and the Air Force said, you're going to get on a deployment schedule, you're going to get on an inspecting schedule, your leadership is going to deploy. The expectation was that there was no guard standard and active component standard. There is all the same standard. And today, the result of that is, if I were the same thing, this weapons officer leaving the active component, going into a guard F-16 squadron someplace, I would have every expectation, and it would be reasonable that I could make it the best fighter squadron in the world. And I would be there in that squadron with 7 other F-16 fighter weapons school patches. Most of the squadron pilots would be full-time. Not all of them, but most of them would. Most of the squadrons, I use this, as my son's an F-16 pilot in the Air Force. He is in the Vermont Air National Guard as an associate pilot. They're deployed right now to Kuwait. And he is literally the only wingman in the squadron. It's a great place to be. Everybody else has to do tours in the kayak. Mike's just flying back and forth and doing bombs and dropping bombs on ISIS every day. And there are just an amazing amount of experience. And if General Goldfein was sitting right here, he would, I think, be just as there is no difference in combat capability anymore in the reserve component, National Guard, active component. There's just not. And that's a good thing. And, we talk about readiness, and all the service vice chiefs were just on the stage, and, the readiness of our National Guard forces is the same as the readiness of the active forces. How do you do it? 30% of your force is full-time and the rest is part-time. It's an interesting thing. Now, our flash to bang, our deployment time out the door, a little bit less responsive. Not a lot. It's not, I'm not talking long periods of time. I'm talking days, maybe a week, not months or multiple months. But it is not a bad readiness story at all. So I'm just telling you that because the Air National Guard became exactly what the Air Force demanded it become, and it was good. So I got just a couple things I want you to get out of this brief today. I'm going to give you, and I'm going to talk all of the National Guard, which you may or may not know. I remember when I first came to work on the staff here, and I worked out on Andrews. I lived on Andrews. My wife came to me and she said, all these people here, none of them have any idea what the Air National Guard is. They think you're in like the Civil Air Patrol. And I was like, So time has changed and we've integrated more and it's gotten much better. But the reserve component of the Air Force is a great story, and same thing with the Army. It's going that way. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick spiel on who we are, what we do, what's different about me than maybe the other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and then kind of open it up for questions here as we go. Next slide. So this is everything the National Guard does. Really, everything about me, if you're a commander, all of your responsibilities are right here on this slide. But if you're a guardsman, so we do 3 things: warfight, homeland, partnerships. So the Air Force gives us about $10 billion a year to be ready to fight wars. The Army gives us about $15 billion a year to make us ready to fight wars. I run the National Guard Bureau. National Guard Bureau's only reason for being is so that we can funnel resources to the states, territories, and District of Columbia so that they can train their part-time force and so that they can fight wars. That's the only reason we exist. That's the only reason that we have a National Guard Bureau staff, is so that we can organize, train, and equip the part-time force. Obviously, I just gave you a great description of the warfight. So the same thing is true on the Army side. We're migrating towards associating units. We have division headquarters deployed in the fight with mission command over forces in the field, in Afghanistan, in Kuwait, in Jordan, and things that we haven't done really with the Army for World War II. The Army's starting to do things like train brigades together, the idea being that we'll have brigades will deploy, and there will be embedded battalions from active duty and from the National Guard that will go together. It's the integration concept and the Army model, I think, that's kind of on the mix for in the future. Everything gets better when they use us. I'm going to make the case that, yeah, they're using us more. It's because of physics. Everything gets better when they have to use us, because when you use a reserve component, you tend to want to recapitalize it, you tend to want to train it, you tend to want to buy it new equipment, you tend to want to do it. When you integrate, leaders know everybody, there's more trust. Trust is everything. And that's just the way it works. So right now, today, National Guard has about 20,000 Army and Air deployed in the fight, Title 10 around the world. That is down significantly from the middle 2000s. 2005 was kind of our high watermark for forces in the warfight. In 2005, we had 100,000 National Guard troops deployed in support of the war in the Middle East. Most of those were in Iraq. In 2005, there were 15 combat brigades in the Army in Iraq. 8 of them were National Guard brigades. And a continuous flow of Army and Air Force. The other thing that happened in 2005, you may recall, was 100,000 deployed fighting the war in Iraq, and 50,000 required to respond to Hurricane Katrina, which was another major event. So that was a pretty big surge for us, in terms of where we did it. But we still, at that time, we had enough. We did have a couple governors come up in the 2005-2006 timeframe and say, look, my entire guard is deployed. Governor of North Dakota at the time was a guy named Governor Rounds, said, hey, my entire guard is gone, and I've got floods. And so he had such a small force, he had to borrow guardsmen from around surrounding states to do his job. So warfight, that's the first reason. That has got to be our number one priority. It is our number one priority. And that's what we do. We're no different than anybody else. It is no different to mobilize a guardsman than it is to mobilize a Title 10 reservist. Sometimes people think, well, you got to ask the governor, you got to do all that stuff. Not true. The procedures to mobilize a reservist are all the same. You have authorities in law, you mobilize them, and you go. The governor cannot stop you from being mobilized if the president wants you to go. All 453,000 members of the National Guard are available to be mobilized today if the president has the authority to do it, granted to him by Congress. Just the way it works, okay? So this is what makes us different right here, is the homeland piece. So when we're not mobilized, and I'll show you a command and control structure, so all of the 450,000 men and women of the National Guard, we organize, train, and equip under the command and control of the governors of our states. That's really the fundamental difference. So the guardsmen can be mobilized by the president to go fight a war. The guardsmen can be mobilized by the governor for any number of reasons that the governor sees fit here in the states. We swear an oath to both constitutions. Constitution of the United States, Constitution from whatever state we're from. I mean, we actually have a different oath of commissioning that we take when we swear into the National Guard. So right now, today, we have about 5,000, and that's kind of the steady state number of National Guard soldiers that we have in what we call Title 32 status. Title 32 is a piece of the law like Title 10. Title 32 is when you're under the command and control of the governor. And so we're doing things. Some of them are in support of Homeland Defense, Homeland Security. So every fighter base on alert in the United States right now. There's 14 of them. All of those fighters are on alert in Title 32 status. They're sitting there under command and control of the governors. However, if they launch, there is an automatic conversion to Title 10. You can't go shooting down airliners or anything else if you happen to be under control. You got to be in a federal status to do something serious like that. So that's the piece. This is what makes me different in terms of the lane here that I own is I'm a member of the Joint Chiefs like everyone else. All that means is if you're a member of the Joint Chiefs, you are a military advisor to the President, to the Secretary, to the Congress. I am specifically tasked to advise on the non-federal role of the National Guard. I advise on everything like everybody else does, but I'm specifically tasked to talk about this. So as I briefed the Secretary, incoming, yet to be confirmed Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Wilson, yesterday, I explained to her that, look, ma'am, you got guardsmen right now who are up in North Dakota at the Standing Rock pipeline incident who are there as police officers. Because of their authority, they're assisting law enforcement. As a National Guard, we can do law enforcement where Title 10 forces cannot. You've got National Guard soldiers out in California at the Oroville Dam that they're standing there postured for it to break. And you've got National Guard soldiers and airmen who are standing there that are ready to respond. They're helping evacuate people. They're setting up shelters. They're doing kinds of things like this. During the inauguration, we had 8,000 National Guard soldiers maintaining security, maintaining presence and directing traffic and all the rest of that stuff on the mall and inside Washington, D.C. From 40 states, they came and they did those kinds of things. And I've given you the kind of scenario here in the homeland that this is what makes us different. We spend a lot of time thinking about this. We spend a lot of time planning for it. States have individual. Keep in mind that whenever anything bad happens in a state, it is in a sovereign state. It's not the NORTHCOM commander's role to fix it. It is not the military's role to fix it unless somebody asks them to fix it. There's only really 4 times that federal forces can go into a state and really do anything, okay? And one is they're asked to come in, and that happens all the time. When something bad happens, they say, I need some more search and rescue capability, I need something else, I need whatever capability they don't have, and they use it. So one is there is no government there to ask, and they need help, so Title 10 forces can then go in. Or there's an insurrection. You can go back and see where that happens, where it's unruly unrest and the laws are being violated. Or there's the last one is somebody is being denied their civil rights. And a good example of that was right here in this state back in the 60s when one day the National Guard was there working for the governor, protecting the forces and keeping people out. The next day they were mobilized working for the president, and the president said these people are being divided their civil rights. Now they're Title 10, they're working for the president, and they're making sure people can get in. Same people, same place, one day working for the governor, next day working for the president. That's a case that doesn't happen very often, but it's a good illustration of a utilization of those kinds of things. So we spent a lot of time doing this, and last year we used 500,000 more man days in state active duty, which means, and by the way, when you're responding to a hurricane or you're responding in some sense, you are paid for with state dollars. The state reimburses the federal government for using the trucks and using everything else, and it's a state bill. And then depending on whether or not it's a federal declaration, there can be federal reimbursement. But that's that. So warfight, homeland, partnerships, and partnerships is something we consider that many of you in here, some of you may very well be from. We have 79 relationships now with countries around the world. Those countries are we have come together. We've been working together with people since the early 90s. It's designed in Eastern Europe. We now have partnerships all over the place. The newest partnership that we have just had was in Argentina is the most recent partnership that's been announced. We have Niger and Indiana is just been announced. And one more coming that's not ready to be announced yet, but that's on the way. Hugely successful tool, trust, relationships. People work together for literally decades. You go from major to major general by going back and forth between countries and having search and rescue, disaster response kind of capabilities. It was designed to be that kind of thing, but 80 times over the last 15 years, nations have said, hey, I will go to war provided I can go with my state partner country. So they have paired up and gone into Afghanistan and Iraq, multiple deployments, multiple times. And what's good for our country strategically, you get another flag on that ISAF map, you get another flag of another coalition partner. So it's huge. So that's the federal level. The partnerships piece of this thing is, at the state level, we make partnerships with all the first responders and that. We make partnerships with our services to do all those kinds of things. We have programs in our communities, like the National Guard Youth Challenge Program, which is a program for at-risk youth and kids and the like. We're good at this. So warfight, homeland partnerships is kind of fundamental to who it is and what we do. When people work for me and they go off to command, I tell them everything you need to know is right here. I say, warfight's first. You got to go. You got to be ready. Everybody who works for you has to be ready. Everybody's got to be an expert at whatever their MOS is, whatever their AFSC is. That's your first and best job. And then when you know how to use all those capabilities and apply them in the homeland for whatever disaster might happen, that's what you do. You go out there and you make sure that you can apply those skill sets no matter the full spectrum of disasters. And it could be everything from a chemical weapon going off in your system to a kinetic weapon going off in your state to your basic ice storm, firestorm, hurricane, and we do it all the time. When everybody knows how to do that, that's great. And then when you have partnerships developed that enable all those other things, then that's key. And you'll be able to, you will be well on your way. And when everybody can explain to you how you do all three of those things by doing that, you're well on your way to success. That soldier or airman in the middle, how do we develop her? How do we keep her combat ready? How do we make sure she's physically fit and she's globally aware and she's technologically savvy and she's prepared to do this war fight wherever that is, that someday she can be and will be the chief of the National Guard Bureau? It's my job. It's every leader's job to make sure the atmosphere out there is open, free, fair, and applies to everyone. So that's the key. This number 54 at the bottom of this thing, 54. There's 50 states. There's 3 territories: Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And there is the District of Columbia. That's kind of a standout place because they don't have a governor. The District of Columbia National Guard works for the President, who delegates that authority to the SecDef, who delegates that authority to the Secretary of the Army. God, I know, God dang, we're confusing, aren't we? It's a crazy thing. But I do understand it. I can't explain it. And so, but here's the thing. Here is the thing that you need to know. Next slide. Okay. There is no higher chain of command, no echelon of command in the National Guard higher than the state Joint Force Headquarters. Governor, Adjutant General, troops in the field. That is the highest. There's no commander above that of the National Guard forces. We mobilize, we go right to work for combatant commanders. Right here. That piece of that block. Okay? Otherwise, we sit right down here under the command and control of the governors, to the Adjutant General, to the troops. There's no line from me, right over here, other than this dash line. This dash line is influence. That dash line is $26 billion. That's influence. Okay? So, and I'm not afraid to use it. I'm telling you, it is. So their first job is to train these forces to federal standards, to make them ready so they can be mobilized by the president. If they don't do that, they aren't federally recognized as a part of the Army and a part of the Air Force, and Uncle Joey stops giving them money. That's the only issue. That's a nuclear option. That doesn't happen. Everybody out there is good. So that's a key. When you say, people look at me and say, why can't you get the tags to stop going to the Hill and fighting the Air Force on this? It's like, the tags do not work for me. They don't even work for the Secretary of Defense. There's no line from the Secretary of Defense to that state piece. This is in the Constitution right here, this piece. It's just, you're not going to change it. If you were starting from a blank whiteboard and somebody thought about is this a good idea or not? I think it's a beautiful model. I love the business model of the National Guard. It is a good deal, but that's the way that thing works. Here's the federal side of this thing. My role in life is here, and unlike the other service chiefs who work for Secretary of a Service, I don't have a service secretary directly. I work for the Secretary of Defense. Realistically, I talk to him no more, no less than the other service chiefs. But I don't work directly for either one. I statutorily advise both secretaries, Army and Air Force, but I do not come under their authority, direction, and control. You may have some questions on that. We'll get to the question part here pretty quick. Next slide. Again, this is Joint Chiefs of Staff. We were sitting there getting ready to go out to the inauguration just a couple of weeks ago, sitting right next to my good friend Dave Goldfein. And people walk up to me all the time. We go to these galas and we're in a mess dress, and people walk up and, "Hey, General Goldfein, how you doing?" I say, "Wrong guy, man. He's right over there." It's good. But happens all the time. I told General Goldfein, I'm not even going to correct him anymore, man. I'm sorry. It's like, yeah, it just takes too long to get to the point. I'll send them your way if they have an Air Force question or something like that. Obviously, the Commandant of Marine Corps, General Neller, is a great guy. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford. We are rampant run over with Marines in the Pentagon, as you may have noticed all over the place. General Mark Milley, CNO, John Richardson, and the Commandant of the Coast Guard, General Paul Zumkampf. We all have a great relationship, great working relationship. We come together in the tank and think about big questions for the national defense. And that's really what a Joint Chief of Staff member does. Joint Chiefs of Staff is essentially a military advisor. This says right here, this is the part of the law that identifies my job. My job is I advise the Secretary of Defense, and I am the channel communications of him to the 54 and to the states. And I mentioned the specific non-federalized role of the Guard. And I am the chief advisor to the Secretary of the Army and Secretary of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the matter. And I can advise them on any matter with respect to how they could choose to construct their services and how their utilization of the National Guard. And as a member of the Joint Chiefs, I have my own opinion on all of those things. They don't have to listen to me, but I can nevertheless advise them. All right, next slide. These are obviously the kinds of things that we do, and I think that over time it has matriculated to the member. A role of the Joint Chief is it's kind of normal now. It was very difficult for the guys that went in there before. I don't know if you've probably never saw the tape. It might be a good instructing video on how someday you could have to testify to Congress, and this could be you. But General Craig McKinley, who was the first guy to actually be put on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had to go sit in a hearing in front of the SASC and sit there with all of those other, they were different guys at the time, but all the other members of the Joint Chief. And they all said, "No, I don't think, no, I don't think, no, I don't think, no, I don't think." And General McKinley said, "Yes, I think I should be a member, and here's why." And then Senator McCain just kind of went went off, Red Star cluster, boom, and then the National Guard was a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That was now 6 years ago, and it's becoming normalized. Next question, or next slide. Okay, so as a Chief of the National Guard, I just put this out there and essentially says my priorities are readiness of the force, readiness to be mobilized by the governors or by the president. We have to be ready for both. And people is my second priority. People is simply, hey, we have to grow and develop our leaders. We have to take care of our families, and we have to take care of employers. All of those things matter to me and my people. My business model for the reserve component fails if we don't have the support of our employers. We have to have a sustainable, rotational, predictable business model that allows people to have civilian lives. That's just who we are. And people sometimes talk about the reserve component as if being a part-timer is a weakness of our force. I'm here to tell you the part-timers in our force are what make us different. The part-timers in force are not a weakness. They are a strength. And I'll tell you something, when it is an amazing thing, we have, there's the pieces that make sense, where you've got the citizen warriors, where they've got the civilian life and they've got the military life. And then there's the linkages you might expect. A doctor is a doctor in both. An engineer is an engineer in both. A pilot is a pilot in both. It's the strange ones that are the most interesting ones to me. It's how do I get this accountant who wants to be an artillery battery commander? I mean, he just likes it. Write the check. How about that? I mean, I go back to my old first sergeant when I was a wing commander at Kelly. I was a wing commander for about a year at Kelly, and my first sergeant he owned a cement company. He had 300 full-time employees. He would drive to work and he would have his truck with his big dualies and a Harley parked in the back. And I walk up to him and I'd say, Oscar, why do you come to drill and watch people pee in a bottle? What is it that makes you want to do that? I mean, the guy's he's got a big, successful cement business. He understands how to do things. But he comes in and he says, sir, I just love to serve. I love the Air Force. I'll do this as long as you will let me do it. He was a great first sergeant. He was unbelievable. And so it's these interesting, there's a professor, an economics professor, who's a command sergeant major. I mean, they love the military, and they want to serve for any number of reasons. I got in the military because I wanted to fly fighters. I saw two F-105s take off one day. I said, hey, this is it. I'm doing that. I am doing that. That's what I'm doing. And so that's what drove me. But there are people who say, hey, look, I want to be a physicist or a doctor or a dentist or whatever it is. You can still serve in the National Guard. So don't ever think about our part-time force as a weakness. It is a strength. We go deploy. We think out of the box. Like I was in Ramstein. I hear these stories all the time. They go, yeah, we had this guy. He worked for Verizon, in his civilian life, and he was able to retool it, and pretty soon the entire camp had internet, wireless all over the place. I mean, it just happens. So anyway, this is it. There's one standard. We got to make it. We got to take care of it. We're a unit-based force. We aren't an IMA force. We want forces that can be mobilized by presidents or governors to go do things, and it doesn't always line up with your MOS. So I went to a flood in Louisiana, and they had an ASOS who was running a shelter. and they were running it. I mean, they were using their leadership and their skills to do all those kinds of things because they could do it. Next slide. I just put this up there because it's all about the joint force. I mean, it really is for us. And I'm sitting here with General Neller and myself. This was the Chad of Latvia, who has since, I believe, just retired. And, of course, General Abrams, the Force Comm Commander, like Air Combat Command for us. And we're watching a great exercise at Northern Strike last year where there were Marines, U.S. Marines, about 5,000 total forces, 5 countries involved, air power, live bombs. And it was a great joint exercise that run by the National Guard up in Michigan. They're going to do it again this year. And General Neller was happy because National Guard wanted Marines to play. So what did they do? They used their truck companies to go get them. And that was their training, and they brought them to the fight. They sent airplanes, Air National Guard used training flights to go pick up the Marines. They brought them to the fight. And it was a great synergy of exercises to run and to do that. Latvian JTACs were up there controlling A-10s and the rest, and General Abrams is in charge of training and making the force ready for the United States Army. And so he was there to watch it and thought it was a great exercise and gave us really good critiques on how to make it better going forward. So warfight, homeland, partnerships, people, that's it. And I'm, as the chief, working on readiness of the force, people in my business model, and innovation. Those are my big 3. How do we change? What do we have to do different going forward to make us a more lethal combat force and make us more relevant inside the homeland? So I'll stop yakking and see what kind of questions some of you guys might have for me. Let me throw it out there. Next slide. I think, yeah, that's all I got. How about it? How many guardsmen we got out here? Afraid to admit it, huh? I see 1, 2 hands, that's it.